clear your conscience from the past. Is violence and the answer?
So on this fabulous day, I am joined with Kayne, Suzanne and Gaverne that are going to bring a wealth of knowledge to the conversation that we're going to be talking about today. We've got a lot to do, a lot to bring together, a lot to really analyse and pick at today. So we have Kayne. Would you like to introduce yourself? Kayne Kawasaki.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Kayne Kawasaki and I am a Black historian and a cultural theorist from Peckham, South East London.
And I'm Susan Pitter. I'm a cultural heritage producer. My practice, my focus has been on Black British and diasporic narratives in Leeds and the North. My background is communications and PR and partnerships, and somehow they've all come together to do what I do.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gaverne Bennett. I'm a PhD historian of Black history, I suppose. I'm also a heritage officer in Hammersmith and Fulham. Big shout out to Hammersmith and Fulham people. And I'm also the author of the Guardian's Black History Timeline, which was their most successful timeline series they ever had, and I'm going to say that for the rest of my life. Okay, so yeah. So that's me.
All right. So the conversation that I wanted to start today was really about looking at how the arts and heritage industries treat Black artists and Black subjects in general. Is it tokenistic? How do we move this story further? How has it been? You know, what are the things that have got us to this point, and how do we change it? So who wants to kick off with that?
Everybody's looking at each
other. All right, I'll go first, I don't mind. I think one of the things that's been most surprising to me is, as a heritage officer, I work in Hammersmith, and I work for a place called Riverside Studios sometimes, right? And we talk about tokenism, we tend to see it as like one thing, right, as it is today. But one of the things I came across in there is what was going on in the 1950s. And one of the most surprising things was, actually, Black people were a big part of the culture that was going on in the 1950s in this country. Because when it came to the end of the empire, there was a whole period where people weren't sure what was going on, all right? Actually, there's a lot of TV, because I found a lot of TV footage. The first Doctor Who, you know Doctor Who? The very first one, there's Black people in there, there are writers on there and so on. But then there seems to be a change once you get to 1960s, when you get to Enoch Powell, from that period onwards, where Black people are kind of like, we're literally just cut out and turned into things, on the margins, not important at all, not central. And then you get to another period again in the 1980s, with people like Benjamin Zephaniah coming through, where you've got Black culture, but it's Black culture more in its own terms. Not just tokenism now. You're starting to get a sense of like Rastafarianism, things like that are coming to the fore. And then there's what I call the period, the Stephen Lawrence period after the 1990s, when I came through, which was now Black people were seen more as part of British culture. Now, not as foreigners coming in. But I think we're in a really interesting moment now.
That's more looking at society to me rather than the actual industries, because I think some of that, what you've explained there, is more about us as self, because as the different generations came in, I always kind of look at certain things and when our parents or grandparents came through, in my case, my grandparents came over, when I find people that have been brought up in with Black people in power, there is a different level of confidence, a different level of self-worth, that they came to the country, they knew who they were, they knew, they were confident in their abilities. And then as it went through that, when you're saying the 70s and 80s, then that's my parents' age, or the 70s definitely. So they schooled here, even though my mother came here as a child, she was schooled here. So she was beaten down, straight away. My mum was one of them that got sent off to the special schools. So they're constantly being told that you can't. but feeling like, actually, this is my country. And then you get my generation, it's like, I'm born here. I got as much rights as you. So there's a different mentality. And I think that's what you've kind of explained there. And then now it's quite strange because you've got the African communities that are coming in that have that strength and superiority and, you know, sense of worth that we had originally, but it's been beaten out of us. So for me, it's like, what happens from here? Are we going to see what happened to us happen to the African communities that are coming in now? Because at the minute it seems quite empowering, but you know, how long before that gets beaten out of you? And then that obviously has an impression on the galleries, the art spaces, because to me, those spaces, the heritage spaces, the art spaces, they tell the stories of society, because that's where you let it out. That's where you know. So, I'll shut up now.
I think for me, if we're going, you know, on the question of whether it's tokenistic and the approach from the galleries, the public archives, the libraries, the institutions, the thing that they are supposed to do, that it's their responsibility to do, is to tell the stories and reflect the stories of the place they're in, the city that they're in. And by their own admission, most of them, they will say that they have not done that, and they cannot do that well, and they cannot do it truthfully if it doesn't reflect the stories of all communities, including Black communities, over time. I think that some of them know and acknowledge that they are not, that they haven't lived up to those responsibilities. The basic thing is that they're supposed to serve all their council taxpayers. And if they're not, then they're failing. And so I know that some of them, and certainly, you know, in Leeds where I am, we've worked on projects which have been great, which have resulted in, that have told Black narratives, that have resulted in the most visited exhibition in the nearly 140-year history of Leeds Central Library, for example. And that was a great partnership. It was a great partnership. My concern my concerns are around, do we keep doing those on a project basis? Do we dip in and then dip out?
Yeah.
And then who gets to tell those stories? Who gets to commission those stories? Because certainly I know in the North, the people that are commissioning, the people at the heads of galleries and libraries and these public programming and theatres as well, there are few and far between are Black faces and people with the lived experiences that we have. And so there needs to be a balance. You know, they're not going to just suddenly cull everybody that's, you know, that's white and in these positions of leadership. And that's not the answer. But it is about who is in those spaces and telling those stories and realizing that the stories go deeper than Windrush, and that we have history and histories before Windrush, and that aside from that, the history is not always the same. It's multi-layered, it's nuanced, it's very much about, our stories include struggle, but they include joy. They include human relationships and human stories that all humans can relate to. And I think that's the important side of things. It's who is creating that presence in those institutions. Otherwise, it will always be on a project dip in, dip out basis, is my thought anyway.
I totally agree, but then I kind of come from the side that none of those stories that they put into the museums, when we're talking about heritage, should not include a Black story, not one. So I think when they are putting their projects together, they need to have people from, you know, Asian communities, Black communities, coming together and just saying, this is the story I've got. You know, where do you fit into this? And just building it out, because there's nowhere that we haven't been. And so to me, every single story that is told within those, in those spaces needs to have some input. Like you say, you know, exactly what you were saying, but it has to be the right people. It has to be the people with the right information
Also on that, you know, and the political spectrum, you know, that's one thing. But in terms of culture and the cultural sector and the landscape of it, I think another thing as well is also, you know, those different layers and nuances and experiences. So I know if you say, you know, Black narratives, quite often I think it's really, it's been a struggle for some of these institutions to grasp that those narratives are not all one homogenous thing. That the experience, or certainly in terms of age and generations, definitely in terms of where in the diaspora your heritage, you know, where you come from, you know, so the experience of some of the Caribbean communities might be different from some of the African communities, and certainly different to some of the South Asian communities. There are similarities, there are parallels, but there are differences as well. And I think quite often it's really easy to think of us all in one, this is it, one group. I'll never forget, I was doing something for around Carnival. And I won't say what institution it was with, the venue that it was in. It was something around Carnival. And the person said to me, I was producing some show or another, and the person said to me, really excited from the institution, oh, and it's fantastic, and we've made sure that the playlist is, you know, Carnival music themed. I said, great, that's great. Just tell me what, you know, what is that? Oh, we've got some lovers rock, we've got some dub and sound system, because I love dub and sound system. I said, as do I. I would encourage you to go back and research some soca, some calypso, some kaiso. So, you know, and it went right over their heads. And that is the thing. If they are in charge, if they are commissioning, if they are the ones that are programming, it's going to be from a different lens.
But didn't you find after lockdown, and you know, it was this whole, we've got to get these people in, we've got to, you know, we need these conversations, yeah. And then as soon as they had the conversation and we showed them that how we did things well, they went, oh, right, now we can do this. And got it completely, you know, like, and it was like, you know, you're seeing that we did this work good. What makes you think that you can just go like that and you're going to...
And that for me is the main thing about tokenism. I always feel like tokenism is off of the back of. And what I tend to find is, especially with our heritage and culture spaces, is that, you know, before Black Lives Matter 2020, I weren't getting those phone calls, I weren't getting those emails, I weren't getting those DMs. Then as soon as that then transpired, George Floyd, BLM 2020, oh, hey, you know, I was getting those calls. And one thing that I'm very against in regards to tokenism is what I coin reactionary representation. It's almost like a knee jerk, like, okay, we need to can we get some Black narratives in, and then what that then breeds is, I think about a pendulum swinging, and I think about, you know, we've got equality, which is in the middle, and then we've got over-representation, let's say on this side, and then on the far left, we've got tokenism. So when that pendulum swings, tokenism, and then it goes shoom, straight over to the other side, over-representation, then what that creates is almost like a culture war, because people aren't ready for it. There's been no building blocks. It's just come so suddenly. Then as a result, there's this culture war of, oh, that's just woke. That didn't exist. That didn't happen. Black people weren't like that. And then it's just like, guys, institutions, heritage spaces, if you built the blocks appropriately, we would be in the middle where we actually have equality and people realize, and equity, and people realize that it's not just, you know, you're doing it as a reaction, but you're doing it from a genuine space. And that's why tokenism for me, I love when I get phone calls outside of Black History Month. Because that shows that you're genuinely not being tokenistic. You know, we have Windrush Day in June, we have Stephen Lawrence Day in April, we have Notting Hill Carnival and Leeds Carnival in August. We have so many different, you know, which is included in our national calendar. We should be getting calls throughout the year. It shouldn't just be tokenistic and, you know, based around 1 month. And often that 1 month will be one day within that 1 month, as opposed to, you know, something that's long term and looking at joy and all these different narratives that we very rarely hear about. Often it's always linked, the Black narrative is linked to struggle, or linked to pain, or you know, one particular Caribbean, West Indian Windrush, as opposed to, you know, a plethora of different things that we've got going on.
I mean, I think the key core of it for me anyway is what came from the 90s for me was the idea of like surface and symbolism, all right? So you'd have like a big black figure when you walked into a big institution, and that was all about symbolism. Or if there was one black person working within a cultural institution, they'd be in every single magazine, right? I think what we need to look at now is actual substance, right? Which goes back to what you're saying, which is right. And what you're saying actually as well, which is, look, if you look at the whole of British history, for example, like I did some stuff with the National Gallery, right? And we started looking at some paintings. And I basically said to them, listen, every painting from about 1600 involves black people in some way, in terms of the way it's being paid for. Even what you see in those paintings, because I explained to them there's some fruits in one of the paintings, which is from the Caribbean. And I said, the people that paid for this painting were trying to show you where their wealth came from, right? So that's one of the stories you need to tell, and it doesn't look strange or bizarre. It's not like just some black figures just popped up, said hello, and then disappeared after October, right? And at first the reaction was like, And then to some of their credit, they came back and said, yeah, actually, you're right. If we start to look at things systematically across the board, but I think we have to move away from that thing of like surface and symbolism, where, you know, if you've got a black face there, then it's all right? I mean, that has definitely been blown out of the water with Kemi Badenoch. That's gone now. We can firmly say the idea that just because someone's black, that it, you know, everything's all right. There was a time, it is true, there was a time, because of the nature of the struggle, if you did see a black person there, there'd been so much struggle they'd been through, right? And what they represented was completely different, like with Obama, for example, right? Okay? Because the time he came out of, generally, when you saw a black person there, they were normally like embattled, okay, for them to be there. But I think we're in a situation now where, I'm not going to over-egg it. I don't over-egg it, right? But Kemi Badenoch does represent something in that respect. There are some black people in positions of power and authority, but it's not really changed the fundamental things that we're talking about here, right? Because it's a deeper cultural issue. It's actually about how this culture sees itself. How does it see itself? This, you know, the island story. Well, you know, people talking about the small boats. I want to talk about the big boats that went out in the 17th century, right? Because that's the key to the small boats that people are writing about the other day here. So for me, it's, as you're saying, and as you're all saying, I would just like to see the things we're talking about part of just like what naturally happens. It is not a big deal. If you're talking about the Tudors, exactly right. Yeah, if you're talking about the Tudors, for example, we talk about the black Tudors as well, all right? You know, if we're talking about, and it's not difficult. In fact, one now I'll let other people speak, right? But one of the issues I've had is like, actually, it's taken a hell of a lot of effort to keep us out of the picture, you know, because we're everywhere. If you've got open eyes for 1 second, any period historically, we're everywhere. So, but that has to be acknowledged first, right? That in the 16th, 17th century, a group of people went through a hell of a lot of effort to literally scrub out black people's faces. Yes. And the effort went into that. People built whole institutions. People put billions into doing that.
But sorry to cut you, I'm not saying, yes, that happened right the way through with the pseudoscience, but it was clearly backed up by the artwork, which is what you're seeing there. Because those narratives, you're thinking back those times, a lot of the people, pretty much like today, if I say myself, didn't read, were illiterate. So what they were guided by was what they saw in the images.
It's so profoundly true, because I was reading something the other day and it said, right, most people in their lifetimes, you know, if you're around in the 18th, 19th century, you might see 25 images, particularly at the 17th century, in your whole lifetime. Your whole lifetime. Maybe if you went and talk about in Europe anyway, let's talk about the whole planet, right? Maybe if you went to the church, you see some of the icons up there and you might have something at home, right? By the time you leave your home in the morning now, you see 100 images in the morning, right? And one of my things is, well, it's just my theory. I can't prove it, okay? And I'll put it on camera and record it, right? But one of my theories is like the impact of like the slave trade on art. People tend to think about it in like a one-dimensional way. They think about the money that paid for the paintings, right? What they don't think about is once you move to a society where your skin color determines your status, right? That determines where you are in the hierarchy. How does that affect an artist? An artist, say, 1,000 years ago, wouldn't worry about how dark somebody necessarily was, right? You have a Roman emperor there. who's dark-skinned, Septimus Severus, there's a coin, he's clearly a black man, right? And you can also see by looking at the coin, the person doing it wasn't thinking about that. They were thinking he's a Roman, yeah? He's running things, right? Whereas once you get to the 17th, 18th century, if an artist made a mistake with the brown colour, right, and then how does that affect how people see colour generally? Not just in terms of skin colour, the vividness of colour, how important it becomes. So once you start to open it that way, that's another way of looking at the issues we're talking about. But I think for me, it's not just what you see, you know, when you go into the gallery and so on. It's like, what's going on behind? It's like, who's working there? Who's making a decision? Because I remember back in the 90s, you'd see black people in institutions, but I used to call them hostages. Yeah, I tell you why. I used to call them hostages because you'd meet them, right? And then use another black person, everyone must be scared because they wouldn't be sure what to do, right? Because they're trying to work out what kind of black person you are. Are you this kind of radical, wherever it is? And at that time, some of the black people working in the institutions, I remember they used to see themselves as gatekeepers, really, right? So they'd be kind of black, but not, you know, they would be too, right? I have to say, it is better now. Like, I went to a thing at the Royal Academy the other day. They had an exhibition there. And I was shocked to see King Tubby's, right? Who's like a dub artist, right? It actually blew my mind to see him in there because I realized whoever had done this really knows what the hell they're talking about. Because this is what, in terms of the actual art, but as to how there has to be an argument, I'm afraid, right? And this is part of what is being avoided here, I think, a little bit. The consensus has to be broken down a little bit because the consensus is to a certain degree that we're kind of doing all right, okay? And we're not, okay? We're not. When we actually look at, really, as you're saying, Tara, when you go into somewhere, it should be that our presence is just part of everything because we are part of everything, right? So what's the problem then, really?
So that's a good question. What's the problem then? Which there is no simple answer, otherwise we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here. But I do think that one or some of the issues lie around people doing their jobs. If you're a marketing manager that's supposed to be speaking to all audiences, you know that marketing is about segmenting your audiences and targeting them in a particular way and a call to action to do something. If you're doing that genuinely with your profession and your job description in hand, then you're supposed to be reaching all the audiences that you need and ought to be reaching. I think what has happened is, yes, there has been a deliberateness about it, but there's also been a laziness as well. Because if you just did your job and did it right across the board, you'd be doing the right thing by all your audiences. So there's a laziness. And also, I think there is an element, certainly in the cultural sector, which by and large believes itself to be quite liberal thinking and open-minded and so on, of being afraid of getting it wrong. Of being afraid of getting it wrong. And in so doing, it has many strands to it, but one of the effects of that is that they'll turn to who they're comfortable with. And some of us may become unwitting gatekeepers. Now, I've fought against that, and I refuse to be the only person that an organizer, that the sector turns to, and I refuse to be the only one that's given opportunities, and I refuse to be the voice for the whole Black community. I refuse, and no one person should be. And I think that's a real issue in our cultural spaces, whether that's on the stage, whether that's in a gallery, whether it's museums. Well, you know, we spoke to Kayne and Kayne said this is what happens. We spoke to Tara and this is what she said. You know, or having a particular artist or performer that is the one that you know is they're going to go to and so on. And I think because that's comfortable and it's lazy as well. Yeah.
I definitely think that I feel like, especially in this day and age, the fear aspect. Yes. So I feel like it's tokenistic in the sense that Black History Month is safe. You know, we can pull upon a couple of, you know, historic Black figures, put them up, that's safe. Yeah. Whereas the fear element, especially now with social media, especially for kind of, you know, millennials down, if you do get it wrong, the backlash that's going to come on your institution, your culture, your art space. And in this day and age, we're seeing the power of a culture war where it's just, you know, it kind of backs these institutions up, one, to be lazy, but also to do what is safe. Yeah. Because, you know, you don't want to put your name on the line, you don't want to put your institution's name on the line, because chances are people that haven't even visited your institution, nor the gallery, nor the exhibition, will be commenting just simply because you included X, Y, Z. So I feel like a lot of the institutions have a level of, or some of them at least, are operating or did operate from a level of fear. And then the caveat or the catalyst, obviously Black Lives Matter, has made everyone now jump onto showing this representation. And then once again, it's overrepresented in terms of there's so many people doing it. And then once again, it creates that polarization. And it's kind of like, guys, we just kind of need the pendulum to swing not all the way this way, but just sit comfortably in the middle where we've done the building blocks and we're at a comfortable space. But I do believe that a lot of the institutions initially, after Black Lives Matter, reacted because of that fear, knowing that they were lazy.
Yeah, black squares galore.
Black squares, pledges, social media posts galore, and
sorry. Don't you think, and as working with the institutions, it's like that pendulum did swing over there, but then gradually as years went on, and it's only last month I was doing something in London, and they were saying, oh yeah, you know, we know this is still really important, but now this is important and this is important, so it's been pushed back. And I'm like, wait, hang on, if you know it's important, then why does it change? Why, you know, how did we just become like a spot on? But you said it was important last year. You said this was something that needed to be incorporated into everything you've done. But now it's just one of the problems. And now this problem's bigger.
Question, who here has experienced that waning after Black Lives Matter in regards to,
But this is the thing, so I have my theory about all of this, right? Which is a lot of the institutions now are playing by the 90s playbook, right? And the 90s playbook was, if you were around in the 90s, I don't mean to, I'm not pulling the age card, yeah? Okay. But if you were around in the 90s, right, what kind of happened was, I remember there was this big wave, you know, after Stephen Lawrence, and there was a big opening up and so on, right? And the wave kind of went down, right? And then we got to where we were just before the Black Lives Matter thing, right? So a lot of people that are in the council institutions now have a memory of that, right? So what they're thinking is, right, okay, 1990s, right? We've got to go at this for about 2 years, and then it's all going to go down. Now, what I have said to people directly is this is not the 1990s, right? In 2020, you saw the biggest demonstrations against racism on earth. I got a phone call from somebody in the Orkney Islands, okay, during the Black Lives Matter demonstration, right? Which had never had a demonstration like thousands of years about that, right? And that's what made me realize, and my daughter having a go at me, because when 2020 happened at first, sorry, I was just like half asleep, because I thought, I've been here before, okay, I'm taught right. But when I start to look around, so this is the thing, this is what I always say to people, look, if you want to make them understand what the different time we're in. Normally when a statue goes down somewhere, and you know what statue I'm talking about, okay, right? Normally when a statue goes down somewhere, someone's head gets chopped off or something changes, right? That statue went down in 2020, right? What change have you seen fundamentally in society around you? Which suggests to me, changes are going on underneath the surface. If you go into any school now, and I mean anywhere in the country, you meet teachers, say under 30, white or black, right? They no longer want to, just teach us history like William the Conqueror and da-da-da. They no longer want to do that. And in spite of the fact that the government recently, until recently, was against this stuff, wasn't it? Talking about the culture war. Have you noticed that this kind of like hasn't stopped, really? That actually, when you look at blogs and things like that, this argument has continued, because I actually think that and that's what I said to some institutions, right? I said, look, this is not a 1990s thing, all right? It's not something where you can take me, off your phone list or take people off the phone list. But also for us as well, one of the mistakes I think we made in the 1990s, which I've avoided, that's why I wish Zita was here today to talk as well, because like when I was invited to do something for the National Gallery, right? I remember in the 1990s, there were some black people that they became like the one, like in the Matrix, Neo, right? They were the voice, right? And they learned to live in that, right? And sometimes you'd meet them and you try to say hi and they just ignore you, right? You're nobody. I don't know who you are. And I'd be like, okay, cool, fine. One of the things that we have to make sure we do is, the talent we know that's around us, is make sure they come in as well with us, right? Because one of the issues is, if this thing, I'm going back to your question about tokenism, look, you can't survive as in this particular way this society is organized at the moment if you're that single black voice within the institution, right? Because your fortunes go up and down. Like we all know here, right? We'll probably get phone calls this week. Because I haven't checked my emails recently, but I know probably when I go look at my email this afternoon, There'll probably be some email from some institution, you know, Gaverne, you know, idea you had. All of a sudden it's become wonderful, right? Because I watched TV and I was so disgusted by what I saw on television. And Gaverne, I hope that you're okay and you're not in a bad way and everything's all right with you, right? And he's like, okay, fine. But what I've tried to do now is, for example, I was working on something and I brought Zita in. Because Zita was going to, Gaverne, I don't know anything about it. I said, I don't care, Zita. Okay, you're a talented black artist, right? What I wanted is to make sure that as this thing goes forward, people know about you. And there's somebody else I brought in from Greenwich as well. She's doing some, Lizon Massa, right? I have to mention her name, right? Because what I learned from the 90s thing is that sometimes I'm not having to go at black people because I'm sick and tired of that, right? Okay? Because the black people that are trying to get through, they're trying. Okay, a lot of them, you know, the pressure we're under is incredible, right? But is that there has to be an understanding amongst us as well, that when you go in there, you need to think about who you're taking in there with you as well, right? Part of the reason why I didn't make it in the 90s, right? Because I should have been more successful, okay? I used to meet people about 5 years ago, it's really sad. Gaverne, you're such a talented guy, I never see you when you win, right? Was because I wouldn't do that, you know, in the 90s. I wouldn't do it, you know, because at one point I was chosen, you know, the chosen black. I was that person, yeah? I'd go in there. This is Gaverne, and he's the obligatory chocolate biscuit. And it was literally that, you know, like, because I used to have, well, I tell people, you know, there's a boat, Oswald boating suits. That was the thing at one point, yeah? Okay. And there's a way you used to have to talk. It's not like today, right? Right? And I remember seeing there at one point. And no, it's great stuff. No, he's a great guy. No. And Oswald, I met you, you're a cool guy, right? You're a cool guy. I'm not saying it in that way, but I remember it was about 2000 actually, sitting there thinking, I'm not doing this, right? I'm not doing this because and I feel I've been turned out to be right. Because I see people now that were successful before and they're nowhere now, all right? Because the thing about bringing people with you is it keeps you in touch with what the hell is going on. Because the problem is, it's great working with institutions, right? But if you're not in, all it is, look, I'll just say to you straightforward, there's about 5 people and I check their reaction to what I'm doing before I go. I don't care what the institution says, right? There's 5 people, because I think to myself, if those 5 people have a bad expression on their face, I don't know about your families, but those people within your family, they don't say anything to you, right? You say you've done something, it's successful, and they're kind of like, oh, that's nice. That's what, you know. But you know, really, they don't want to hurt you, right? But they're not really proud of you doing that thing. And I think we have to have a bit of that thing in us as well, to think to ourselves, okay, remember your 14-year-old self. Remember your 10-year-old self, right? What would they make of that if they went into somewhere and they weren't represented in the right way? Or you do something where they go to school and they get taunted in the playground, right? I mean, I'll say something, I'll shut up. I was going to do something the other day, you know, I'm wearing a Kamala Harris t-shirt and everything, right? And I was sitting down there, you know, like the first human being was a woman, isn't it? Black woman, right? And she sat down and I thought, wow, wonderful. So a black woman is the most important human being 3 million years ago, right? And so she might be the most important human being today. I will talk about culture because I think it does with. But then I thought, hang on, how could that be taken by the right-wing press? Because if you see a picture of her, she looks like a monkey, you know, the original human being. It's more simian than human. I thought, no, I'm not going to do that to Kamala, right? I'm not going to do it to all the little kids, you know, that have to go to school. Because there might be elements within the press and so on. But I think, and I'll end on this, one of the things we also have to understand is within institutions, there's cultural wars outside of institutions, but there's cultural wars within institutions. And the people that we tend to come across within those institutions are the people that are on our side, if I can put it that way, that have been fighting. And they're normally depressed. I don't know, I met some really depressed people within institutions because they've been trying to push this thing. And then they see someone like Black Lives Matter and they think, right, okay, I'm going to go and deal with that racism inside my workplace and I'm going to bring in Gaverne or whoever it is. And so what part of the role that I try to do is I try to understand things a bit from their perspective, right? So you know what you're saying about just not rushing something in there, you know, throwing, you know, like all the cards on the table. I try to think, okay, so how am I going to create something here which is a bit sustainable, right? Sustainable. So one institution, I just said to them, look, we need to look at the calendar. We need to look at the calendar and you just need to make sure that whatever you're doing throughout the calendar, this is one of the items on your agenda, right? And you need to get somebody in the room who's concerned about it, who feels bad about it, right? But yeah, look, I think...
I do agree with you, but I think that the idea that most of the people within the institutions are on our side.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
There is what it is. There is a embattled minority within some institutions, right? That want to do all this stuff, right? I met them. You talk to them and say, I want to do it right. And so they're, look, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say, you know,
they do.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, from working inside them and beside them, I think they are very well-meaning people.
Yeah.
They are very liberal people. They want to appear to be doing the right thing, as long as it suits them to a certain extent. Because, I mean, I can only go on my own personal experiences. And when I was dealing with the Castor Paintings project...
Well done, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The bit that stopped me in my space was the reactions from the people that I didn't expect it from. And doing what I do, I'm quite used to doing anti-racism training with police, firemen, you know, all these hardcore racists, you know, they come at you and you know what you're going to get. You know, I'm hardened to that. What I got around the Castor Paintings was a very different form of, I don't even know what I'd call it, because it was very educated, you know. I can't explain it, but what I got around that really took the wind out of my sails for a little bit, and it took, you know, I had to come away, and I think it was because they were the peers. They were the people that I had communication with, the people that I thought better of, the people that I thought, okay, maybe we can have these conversations. Maybe I could have those conversations with you, and you want to try and understand it from my perspective. Whether you can or you can't, I feel like you might be. When I got it from those, it was kind of like, whoa.
But you see, this is what I'm trying to say. The people that within an institution that may support up to a certain point what you're doing, I think when they're having a conversation with you, they're thinking to themselves, you know, when they're in a meeting with other people, yeah, that they know they're against this, right? They won't say things to our face because there's people they're right. Exactly. So they've got, sometimes you're dealing with people there's a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing you're dealing with. Because one bit of them, the sunny bit of them's talking to you, but then the dark bit of them's thinking, when I go back into that meeting, I'm gonna. That
you're just a problem.
Right.
Yeah,
so,
you're a problem. Right, so they have to be nice, but you are actually the problem. Right. And that's how it felt.
This is where the C word comes in. It's like courage, okay? Because then you and yourself have to draw your line to make people know that I'm not getting involved in this thing, because I'm sorry, I have to face my family afterwards, right? And for you, this is just a project you're doing in passing. This is my actual life, right? This is something where my children, my parents and other people are going to see this around the place, right? And that is a factor for me. I know you've got your issues going on, and I'm a 10,000-year institution, and we've got, right, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. But for me, one of the issues is being able to make sure that I can be proud of what I'm doing, that I can actually show it to my children and not be ashamed of it. And also that it's going to stand. It's not exhibitionitis, as I call it, right? This is just another exhibition. This is something where when somebody goes into that institution, you know, that art gallery, what have you, can stay on the wall there or can be part of what they're doing for the next 100 years and just sits there. Yes.
Have you had much to do within the institutions? Because you've come from a completely different.
Yeah, so I've had experience with the Fitzwilliam Museum, and they did a project called Black Atlantic. I can't remember the tagline, but it was like resistance, power, and people.
That was brilliant.
Yeah,
that was brilliant. Well done,
so I got invited down to that. I got to see the exhibition. I got to look at some of the pieces, and that was quite powerful and quite tastefully done. But I think the power, and I use quotes in that I have is because I'm coming from a social media space. They know that with the power in the people that's behind my views, and I've cultivated a niche audience, that if something was to go awry, it would obviously be amplified to the community very quickly. So I say that to say, I feel like I only get invited to spaces when they know they've got it down. Yeah, when they've done their research, they know it's not tokenistic. You know, they've consulted X, Y, and Z. So I would say that largely a lot of my experiences, and one thing that I was thinking when I was sitting here and listening to everybody speak, is that anytime I've been invited, my experiences have been positive. And anytime I've intended, like just on my own accord, gone to a particular institution, museum, art space, culture, it's been positive. But that's because I know it's going to be good because I know the feedback. I would say my only kind of quote unquote negative experience would only ever be through the press with historic institutions where we know that, you know, they have certain items that shouldn't be there. So that's the only kind of, so to answer your question, my experience personally has been largely positive. Even what you was talking about in regards to showing up. When I do show up to these places, I show up as my authentic self. So I never feel the need to, you know, if I don't want to, put on a shoe, or I can put on a trainer, I can, you know, wear whatever trousers I want, or I can even go in a hoodie. I can go with my hair cut how I want to. And, you know, I've never really felt that need to change my accent or assimilate or do RP. And then when I leave there, you know, switch back to my London Peckham vernacular. I haven't experienced that, but equally, I know from whence we came, and I understand that I'm standing once again on those building blocks of people that came before me, entered into those spaces, may have had to have compromised to ensure that I can stand there as my authentic self and, you know, look at the art and have an impact and get those calls from those people who do have it down and are willing to invite and allow me to consult in some of their culture and their arts and their projects, which I think is really important, because coming back to the initial point is that, you know, millennials down, the baton is, I feel like the baton is maybe like 5 to 10 years, like about to be passed to us. And then when it is passed to us, I don't want it to be, you know, when Jamaica in one of those races in the Olympics, and it was a little bit when it passed to Usain Bolt and he was on the final leg and then he grabbed it and then he had to quickly shimmy it over to the other side. I don't want it to be that kind of exchange. So I'm happy, one, to be sat here, to be present, to be listening. And I hope that other people from, you know, who follow me, I also check this out and they kind of take on some of the gems. But I say that to say, when that baton is passed to us, it needs to be such a smooth transition because we're all part of the same team. If we think about those 4 players, let's think those 4 runners on the track, let's think about them being each generation. And ultimately, I do hope that, you know, when we finally kind of cross that line, we cross and we finish strong. And then, you know, we can kind of put it to bed and then move on to the next race. But I don't feel like we're there yet. But I say that to say my experiences have been positive. And I feel like that's because of the players and the runners before me.
I think one of the things that, if we're looking at these institutions as well, and I've had great and set up great partnerships and had great experiences, as well as appalling ones as well. And I think you'll find that in work life anyway, won't you? It's just that it's amplified more when we're dealing with what we're dealing with. And I think one of the ways for me to kind of gauge things is if I get a sense of an organisation or an officer or whatever of that organisation, whether they're doing it because they have to meet their main funder, tick those boxes, whether it's, you know, whichever funder it is, doing it because they have to and need to, or whether they want to as well. And, you know, listen, if you're under a funding regime, you have to tick those boxes. You have to meet those funder requirements as well. But they're also, I think we can tell, those who want to go beyond ticking the box, who want to listen to what we bring from our experiences in the sector and beyond as well. And I think that's an important thing to look out for. Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
That's what kind of what I'm trying to say is sometimes you go into an institution or you work with an institution, because I can normally feel it when I walk in there, right? Okay. You walk in, you sit down, right? And so sometimes you might meet the person that's the most positive about this, really wants to do it, right? But then you go into the office and you look at some people's faces and they kind of look at you. It's not even negative. It's not even like directly negative, but you just feel there's not the energy here, right? But that's why I think sometimes you have to be, there's a tactical thing that has to go on here, right? Look, I don't want to sound like I'm some compromising mouse in the corner, you know, backing off in the corner, but it's more like this. It's more like, okay, So you've got somebody who wants to do it, right? Okay. And they're glad. You can actually feel the gladness from there. And they're like, they're rearing to go because they've been dying to do this for years, right? So then sometimes you need to kind of put yourself in their position, right? To work out what can I do to completely strengthen their position within the organization, because I'm not in they're not in my situation and I'm not in their situation, right? So some things I've suggested sometimes have been, yeah, it's been to aid those people. So I said, right, why don't you put the argument like this, right? Why don't you, I mean, I won't go into what, because we can't, I know it's not naming organizations here.
Yeah, but I think I'm a bit more angry. And I don't say, I mean, angry is probably not the right word, but and I get it, and I know that you know, we've had to, but I think I'm maybe the next generation down from you, and
Tara, I went supernova. You know, sun goes through different stages of its life. I went supernova about 20 years ago, and I turned to black hole. So you know the anger thing. Yeah,
for me, you know, I come from the hip hop industry. This is what you've got. This is who I am. You know, I was never prepared to change in any way. I must admit, you know, when you're talking about like the way we talk, I maybe when I'm talking to the museum people, I talk a little slower. But aside from that, I was always, listen, I'm my jeans and my trainers, this is me. And as long as what's coming out of my mouth and what I'm doing is on point, you shouldn't have any worry about what I look like or how I, you know.
But that's what I'm saying about bringing other people with you, right? Because it's important. I think it's important when you go into these spaces that people are aware that you are part of something bigger.
Definitely.
And they're just 100%. Not dealing with you, the special individual here, right? So I normally try, if I'm doing something, I try and bring a friend or
you got to
in there, right? To say, look, I actually represent something here, and you know, I'm confident in myself anyway, all right? And I think that some of that is partly generational as well, because I got a sense of myself.
But I think sorry to cut you, but what I was meaning by that is, you know, when are we going to stop helping them to help us?
All right, I'll tell you how I figure that in my head. As I said, I have a line in my head, yeah? There was a line in my head, right? And so, okay, there's a line in, So, yeah, I'm helping you to advance the agenda that I want to advance, but I'm not going to go past that line, so it takes something out of myself, out of what I'm about, right? And I don't know about the rest of you, but sometimes you do know when you're in a conversation, it doesn't feel right, okay? You know when something comes up and you think, I don't, all right? And what I've learned to do is just say to myself, right, once I start to hear that voice in my head saying, listen, a friend might walk away from you, okay? Or you might not be able to get people to turn up to this exhibition, right? Or you might not want to talk about this exhibition to anybody. You might just want to keep it quiet, right? Then I just say to myself, well, no, I know it might be uncomfortable for you, and it might be hard for you, but we're going to have to go and have this battle, right? Because we have to stand. And I think that's sometimes the problem has been is that people can't find the middle way with that, right? It's either complete retreat, and the army runs away, right? Or you just complete attack all the time, right? There has to be a thing where you say, okay, so I'm going to, when you get a moment to advance, though, for God's sake, take it.
Yeah. I don't know, my first couple of exhibitions that I did like completely on my own, I remember I did one with the Race Equality Centre, and Iris, who's a great friend of mine, she kind of read it all through and she went, Tara, you cannot end this exhibition with a slap. There has to be some sugar at the end. You can't just be slap, slap, slap. You've got to get to the end and put some sugar. And it was a really good lesson for me when we're talking about that kind of, because sometimes and I wouldn't, anger's the wrong word, but when you're passionate about something, you want the truth, and the truth is hard, and it's hard to soften that truth when you are talking just about Black history sometimes, and you're looking, I mean, the one that we did was Together We Won the War, so we was looking at World War I and why it started and how it started and the interactions with African, Caribbean and Asia. So there was a lot in it, and it was something that I was asked to do that I would have never, they come to me and said, can you do something? And I was like, I didn't even study this at school. This was not something that, but when I started getting into it, and I realised how much we had to do, and it was all about the African continent, it was so interesting, but it was really hard not to.
But isn't it though that the truth is hard, but the truth is also beautiful, and the truth is also joyful, and the truth is also about ordinary people as well. And I think sometimes we miss the opportunity to do that because we can be so focused on trying to explain that pain and trying to explain that struggle that we forget about.
It was a really good lesson. To have to kind of just take it back and think about it and positively tell the story.
That's why I love what you said about joy, you see. Because sometimes the whole thing about the black experience is just presented like, I call it top boyism. Right? So everything's just dark. Yeah, well, I'm having a hard time, right? When actually, that is not the... No, well, that's why yeah. Because
But I get it. It's like, it's profit in the pain.
Yes.
And that's the thing, because what you came to earlier about that exhibition in Leeds and it being, the most, what did you say? You said most visited. And what's really interesting is that now that's really easy to quantify in regards to, yes, you can see your cultural spaces in terms of numbers when you do these black narratives and black exhibitions, but also online. So when creators come like myself post videos, I can go onto their page when we do collaboration posts, and I can see that the black stories get the most views because it is hidden history. It's not history that's spoken about often, and it's not history that's spoken. It's in there in the curriculum, but often the history teachers that are millennials and above will tend to go for the ones that's easier, the Henry VIII, the ones that's, really easy, really simple. Whereas, the ones that about the British Empire, when you look at the statistics of teachers who choose to teach that, it's extremely low. It's in single figures. But I hope, coming to what you mentioned earlier, that millennials down teachers will start to tackle some of those subjects.
Let me cut you now. But I think it's been a brilliant conversation, and we will be back next week for a little bit more on a different subject. But thank you very much for all of you being involved in today's conversation.
We don't answer to no more orders from the board.